Welcome back to Unreal Engine 4X Project Section 2, Remembering the Classics, Mastering the Mechanics of Pong. I'm Mike Sill, and in this section, we're going to take a look at design analysis and Greybox of our Pong environment, creating the player movement and the AI movement. We're going to create the game ball, and then lastly, we'll take a look at setting up our endgame with our goals and score variables. This is Video 2.1, Design Analysis and Greybox. In this video, we're going to take a look at our project setup and management. We'll set up our folders, we'll set up some materials so we can designate what we're looking at. We'll block out our playfield, set up the geometry and some boundary BPs, and finally, we'll take a look at creating the Pong game mode. Let's begin. Go ahead and click New Project tab and click Blank Project, and then we'll output to Desktop Console with maximum quality and with the starter content. Let's name our project UE4, not $, 4_Pong, and click Create Project. Alright, now that we have our scene loaded, we need to save our project. So first, let's make a new level, create an empty level, and now save. File Save As. And let's right-click the content folder and create a new folder, and we will call this UE4_Pong. This folder will hold all of our files for this project. Let's right-click again and create another folder and call this Maps. And this will hold all of our levels. Let's name our map Pong_playfield and click Save. Perfect. Now we need to set up our playfield. Let's go into the UE4 Pong folder and right-click and create another folder and name this Mesh. This will contain all of our geometry. And speaking of geometry, let's go to the Mode tab and select Geometry and drag a BSP box. I'm going to drag out the transform details so you guys can see it a little better. And let's just reset the transform. Now it's at 0, 0, 0. And let's talk about dimensions. Our field should be rectangular, so let's put a value of, let's say, 100 on the X, 5, 1, 2, nope, let's back this up, sorry about that. Let's make our X 2,880, and our Y value 5,120, and our Z scale will be a value of 10. So now we have a gigantic rectangle that is extremely thin, which is perfect, because Pong is essentially a 2D game. Let's start talking about setting up the boundaries, so let's Alt and drag on the Z-axis, and reset its transform. Let's make this the top and bottom boundary, which means we need to change our dimensions for our brush settings to, say, 100 on X, 5120 is fine for Y since that is the length of the playfield, and Z, let's change to 100. That way it gets a little thickness. We're going to lower the playfield here really quick to negative 150 centimeters so our gameplay doesn't get interrupted or the ball doesn't collide with the floor and intersect. Let's move our boundaries into place. So on the X, let's put this at a value of 1500 in the positive X-axis. Before we do that, let's take a step back here, and we need to make all of our pieces except our playfield into a blueprint. So how will we do that? Well, under Details, under the brush settings, you can see this Show Advanced. Just go ahead and expand that and click Create Static Mesh. This turns the BSP into a static mesh. Let's navigate to UE4 Pong, to our mesh folder, and name this SM for static mesh _, and the remainder name will be just boundary, and create static mesh. Great. Now we can actually delete this and bring in our static mesh from our mesh folder. So before we turn this into a blueprint, we need to set up our mesh. So we want things to not go through our boundaries, so we need to worry about our collision. So you can see I have individual poly collisions shown in blue here, but we need to have a physics box. So let's go up to collision and add box simplify collision. Now we have a rigid body that will deflect anything we toss at it. So go ahead and save, and then let's just double check, make sure everything else is selected properly. Always make sure everything looks good. Everything's fine. Fantastic. Let's X out of this. And then drag in our SM boundary. Let's scroll up to the top and reset its transform. And now we can turn it into a blueprint. We can do this by just clicking blueprint/add script. Now let's open UE4 Pong, and we haven't made a BP or blueprint folder yet, so let's right click and add another folder and call this blueprints. Click in the blueprints folder and change the SM boundary name to BP for blueprint _ boundary. And click create blueprint. This brings up the blueprint editor. And this is what we're looking at. It has the BP boundary. This is the blueprint container, and then underneath we have our static mesh SM _ boundary. I'm going to try and rename the static mesh. Oh, that's right. You can't actually change the name the inherited static mesh. You can do that by adding a component, but you can tell what it is over here under the static mesh that we are using the proper mesh. Okay, so we'll save this and we'll X out, and we will go ahead and, just for practice, delete this object and bring in our blueprint boundary. Reset its transform, and let's put this at 1500 on the x-axis, and let's alt drag on the x-axis to make our other boundary and put this at -1500 on the x-axis. There you go. Now we have our simple playfield set up. It's kind of bland, everything is the same checker pattern, so let's go ahead and quickly, before we move on, right click in the content browser and create a new folder. This will be our materials folder. Double click the materials folder and right click in the empty folder and create a material. We will call this M for material _ playfield, and double click to open it, and drag our material editor to the top, and let's create our material. I'm going to hold 3 and left click, and this brings up a black vector 3, and just plug that into the base color. And then let's create a vector 1 by just holding 1 and left clicking and plugging this into roughness, and get rid of our specular highlight by changing this to a value of 1.0. Now it is completely rough and matte, and that is exactly what we want. So I'm going to apply and hit save. Let's X out. Now I'm going to click on the BSP brush, scroll on down, and under surface materials, make sure your M playfield is selected in the content browser, and click this arrow, which is to use selected asset from content browser. So when I click it, you can see now that our M playfield is applied to the object in the scene, in the viewport. So now we don't have to worry about the sides or the undersides. As you can see, it hasn't affected the entire BSP, but that's because each BSP side has its own individual material identification per side, so we're fine in that regard. We're not going to see it. So I've changed this to unlit, and you can see that we now have a little more contrast and we can see what we're working with. Let's go ahead and create a new material for the boundaries we're working with by hitting Control-C and Control-V from our playfield material, and let's right click our new material and rename this to M _ boundary. Let's double click to open up. As you can see, since I copied and pasted the material, our nodes are still here, and we can just adjust them accordingly. Let's change this to, not too classic white, something a little with a little bit of color so we don't get too bored. Something sky blue. Let's use our sRGB preview, or our linear interpolated color preview. This way you can see an accurate representation of the color on your screen and across all other screens. Let's go with a little more color and a little drop in value. And maybe a little higher. There we go. Okay. Now, the roughness is fine, but we actually don't need it. I'm going to break the link, and then we're going to use the emissive color. But let's get rid of this this vector 1, and we're just going to use a multiply. So hold M and left click, and this creates a multiply node. Let's drag our vector 3 into slot A. It's going to take all these values and multiply it by 1 currently. If we want a stronger emissive color or a stronger glow, we need to change this constant B value. So in the constant B, let's go with a higher value for more glow. Let's say a safe value of 3, and you should see a little halo. Not too much. Let's bump this up to 8. Still nothing. Let's go ahead and apply. There you go. You can see I had forgotten to plug in the output into the emissive color. There we go. Way too bright. Let's bring that back down to a value of 3. Even so, let's cut that in half to 1.5. There we go. That should be fine. Go ahead and click apply and click save. Now we can X out and click your boundary and control click the other boundary. Select the boundary material in your content browser, and under materials you can see even if we have a selection, we can just still apply the content browser selection and it will apply to the group. So let's go back to lit mode, and you can see our emissive textures and materials are now showing up in the dark, and our playfield remains black. This is exactly what we want, and it looks great. So this sets up our playfield and gets us ready for the next video. But before we move on, we need to take one more step. Let's right click in the content browser, click a new folder, and name this extras. This is going to hold the various information of game modes and other things that don't fall under the regular categories of mesh or blueprint and so on. So we need to create a special mode that will tell UE4 that we're making Pong. It won't understand that we're making Pong, but it needs to know that it's not a deathmatch, it's not a capture the flag, etc, etc. So what you do is you make a game mode, and as you can see, game mode defines the game being played, its rules, scoring, and other facets. So that's what we need. Click game mode, and then we need to name this GM. Autosave got me. Hit F2, GM underscore UE4 underscore Pong. And there you go. Now that about does it. I want to set up our project settings to use this game mode. So we'll talk about this more in the next video, but for now, in the project settings, click on maps and modes. Let's expand the default modes. And you can see the default game mode is just the selected game mode and the default one that loads when you open UE4. So right now it's using a default pawn, it's using a default HUD, player controller, so on and so forth. Let's change this from game mode to GM UE4 Pong. And let's go with the, when it starts the editor, we want to change to our Pong playfield. And same with the game default map. This way, when you open UE4 the next time with this project, it will open up with this map instead of minimal default. So for now, hit save, and that's it. Great job. Alright, so in this video, we've taken a look at our design analysis in Greybox, we've set up our project management, and we're good to go for the next video. Next video is Ready Player 1. We'll take a look at creating the player movement and input. See you there.